Hey everyone, it's Terry with Terry's Tidbits. We are on week 7 of the Sales Cloud Consultant Study Group. And this is a little bit shorter video, primarily because we didn't have a couple of our presenters show up. One of them was sick. And so I had to kind of try my best to cover these topics, kind of sort of off the cuff a bit. So I hope you find it helpful. It's on account and contact management, the record ownership, the impact of that, record access. We talk, there's a great not slide, but a website that I had that talked about the record access and how that worked and the account hierarchy. So hope you find it helpful. Again, just kind of sharing off the cuff mostly on these topics. So good luck on the exam as you take it. This is week 7. All right, everybody, this is a small group today, but we are here to talk about account and contact management. And our presenters are all missing today, so you get to hear me talk through a lot of this. Good news is I do have one presentation that was prepared, just wasn't able to be here due to sickness, which is understandable. And so the first one we want to talk about is going to be record ownership. And the description on that one is to review how ownership of account and contact records drive access to related records. And I found a fantastic article that I wanted to share with you guys and just kind of walk through and talk through this one. If I can find my share screen button, which is always hard because it's the big green one that is like yells at you when you look at your control panel. Okay. And I'm going to throw this link in the chat for you as well, because this might be useful just to kind of go through this side by side while I talk to it as well. And but this article I think is one of the best I think I've seen, as it talks to record ownership, why Salesforce does record ownership, and the different methods and things to kind of consider as it relates to ownership. And so let's just I'm just going to walk through this. This will be the presentation, is this particular article. And I liked a lot of what they had to say here about why users should own records. And I get a lot of questions when I work with customers on, what do you mean that records have to have an owner? And I thought it was interesting. They say somewhere in here that is often a foreign concept to a lot of, right here, this sentence. Most database driven applications and platforms, access to data isn't tied to ownership of a record. I guess I never thought about that, but in my enterprise days, corporate America days, I guess that was kind of true. I never kind of connected the two together, but it does make sense that that's something that might seem a little bit foreign to people when they first come into a Salesforce world where everything is really tied around that owner of the record. And this section here, where we talk about solo work, ad hoc collaboration, and structured collaboration, let's say that you have an assignment that the employee works independently, and all of their customers just belong to them. So they're not a part of any kind of a sales team. They're just it's their record. They're responsible for everything. And configuration in that kind of an environment, you might think that, well, they probably report to somebody. And in that scenario, you would then configure access at a role level, because your role hierarchy can then grant access or visibility to the people above them in their role hierarchy. So it's real simple in the sense that role hierarchy then controls your visibility. Keep in mind that when we're talking about these types of things, assume that we're in a private org, okay? So start with that as the assumption. There might be multiple salespeople but they're all working independent of each other. And so that owner of that account, or the person that's responsible for that account, is who would have visibility, and anybody upstream in their role hierarchy. Does that make sense? Okay. The next one here is the ad hoc collaboration. And in this scenario, ad hoc is a keyword. And if you get something on an exam question that talks about things being ad hoc, almost always assume in that scenario that it's going to be a manual sharing role. And that's exactly what this refers to in this one, is the ability to, somewhere in here, I believe it uses that, allows the owner to share the record with others when appropriate. And the way you do that is through manual sharing. And then there's the structured collaboration. This is the environment where your salespeople work with a team of people, and there might be multiple roles related to a given account record. So we might have somebody who is the customer service manager. We might have the salesperson. We might have an inside sales, a variety of different people that need access to that record. And we've talked about this concept before, but that would be where you're bringing into consideration things like account teams, where you can then define the role of the person that is a part of the support of that account. Does that make sense? Now, one of the other things that is, and I don't know if I might try to see if I can pull up an example of something that's kind of useful. It's going to be really hard to tell in one of my dev orgs, but if you have access to one of your Salesforce orgs and can jump in and follow along with this concept, it might prove more interesting for what you can see versus what I'm going to be able to show you. But I'm going to see if I can't show you one little bit of insight that we're going to see later here on this page kind of talk to. And that is the ability to see who has access to a record. So this is going to be a really bad example. Here comes Kelly. Nice. Just because it's there's only 2 people in this org and it's not private. So this will show you how you can identify who has access to a record, which can be really, really helpful for you. So I'm going to first switch to Classic, because I don't think this is available in Lightning yet. And then if I go to a record, let's just see if I can, I don't know if that's an account record. Yeah, cool. And look at, I believe it's under sharing, and then I can do this expand list. That expanded list will tell you who has visibility to this record and why. Now, if you're looking at this in your own production org, your list has probably got a lot of people on there, and it's really helpful to be able to see the reason why they get access. And so my why here is probably going to be because I'm the owner. Oh, I'm an admin, so I have full access. You might see things like you have access because you're the owner. You might see access because it's inherited by a bunch of you're inheriting access because somebody else has access that you're above. So a lot of interesting variations on the why. But if you're working with somebody and you're trying to figure out some of this complex visibility things, or if you're trying to test why somebody is able to see information, then that's a really, really helpful option to leverage. Again, it's Classic. I believe it's only in Classic. I don't think we have that in Lightning yet. Hopefully it gets its way there at some point. Let's go back to that document. Did I just No, there it is. Okay. And Kelly, I put in our chat a link to this document for you. So you'll be able to just grab that if you'd like. So how ownership drives record access underneath the hood. The owner of the owner field on all records, except for the detail records in a master detail. These are the components that drive the ownership architecture. So the owner obviously can see the record. If it's in a master detail relationship, meaning that you've got, let's say you have an opportunity and you have line items. You can't have a line item without the opportunity record. So your owner of your opportunity inherits that visibility to all of the line items below it. So there is no owner per se on the opportunity line item records. And there doesn't need to be because the parent in that scenario owns the records by default. The object share tables. Now, this could be a brand new concept to you unless you've looked at all behind the scenes of Salesforce. But every object in Salesforce, there's also an object share table that goes along with it. So the picture right down here kind of gives us an example. I should make this a little bit probably bigger so it shows up better on the recording. So you've got your account object, which you're familiar with. Behind the scenes, there's going to be an account share object as well. Every object is going to have that scenario with the exception of those that are children to master detail. It's kind of cool to go look at this object sometime if you've got the ability to kind of jump in and behind the scenes and see what it's doing. And you'll see some of that as we go down here a little bit further. The other method is through group membership table. Keep in mind that your groups, the reason this one is here is because that can be, if you're doing sharing, so org-wide sharing, you can share based off of groups. And so that gives you that ability to grant access to groups. You also have queues that can own records in some scenarios. What objects are queues allowed for ownership? Anybody know?
Case for sure.
Case, yep.
Leads,
yep. And? Task, yep. Good job. I think that's the only three. Am I missing any that anybody else knows? Those are the three that I remember. You also have your role hierarchy and then territory hierarchy. And we talked, I think, about territories last week, if I recall. All right, so this is that account share picture that we were just looking at, and this is what it contains. So this is the data. So you have the ID of the record being shared. So that would be the account ID in this particular example. You have the user or group that has access to that record. And then you have their access level. And then the row cause is the reason that they have access to the record. So if I own the record, then I'm going to have a row cause of owner. If I manually shared this record with Meredith would be the user ID, and it would show manual for that sharing or for the row cause. So when you go into behind the scenes in Salesforce and you look at this information, the Y is the row cause. That's why you have access to that record. Some reason. So that's kind of cool, a little bit behind the scenes there of how Salesforce does this. When a user requests access to a record, the system does these following 5 things. I would just kind of read through that just so that you're aware. this is really deeper probably than what the exam may go, but it's incredibly insightful information for how Salesforce does this whole sharing process. And so now if we go into some of the role groupings, we're going to work with several pictures. It's going to look like this. So you got basically Salesforce type hierarchy here. So you got Mark at the CEO, a couple VPs, sales ops, service, and then you've got some territories down here, or people who own that specific territory. And I'm going to zoom in here real quick. But if the VP of sales, who is Maria, if she owns a record, Mark is getting access to that record as well. He gains access because he's higher in the hierarchy. Notice that VP of sales, even though they're peers, Maria's name is not over here in the VP of service side. If you continue down that tree, you have Wendy, who's our sales ops, and Maria and Mark both have access to that because they're above them in the hierarchy. Same over here on the service side. Bob is our record owner. Steve and Mark have access to his record. And that continues down here to the lowest level, which is our Western. Sarah owns that record. Wendy, Maria, Mark have access to it. Western, I can't say that name. I don't know why they would do that to me. I'm sure they did it specifically to make it hard for me to teach. But I can't pronounce that name. But this individual, you've got Wendy, Mark, and Maria that have access there as well. Okay, so that we're going to repeat this little diagram as we go down here. So if we look at owner-based sharing rules, we're moving into the sharing rules. What the sharing rule here is now saying is that I want to create a sharing rule where Wendy has visibility to Steve's records, or to the VP of services records. And so when that happens, I'm sorry, I think I've got this backwards. I think what they're sharing is Wendy's records will be shared to the VP of service. So now the folks who have access to, let's say Western is our example, is going to be it'll be Wendy, Maria, Mark, and Steve, because of the sharing rule that we created that grants that visibility. And I think we've got several. So here in this particular scenario, they're talking now about sharing roles where we're sharing based on roles and subordinates. And so now it's roles and subordinates at this role and subordinates level, which means everyone underneath Maria has visibility to Bob's records. Or I think they talk about it vice in the other direction, but you still get the concept here. I think the pictures do a nice job of explaining that visibility. So here, VP of sales, her records are being shared with Bob using roles and subordinates. So Western and Eastern have visibility to those records. And then there's another one. And then there's also this idea of sharing records with a public group that can also just anybody who's a member of the group then would have visibility to those records as well. Now we're talking in this section, it talks more about the ownership and the data security. That's a good section to just kind of read through and understand. This is one here, the sharing performance is one that I tend to really watch for, that a lot of times admins will make mistakes with in how they will, let me give you an example because it'll probably make more sense. I've got a customer right now where they have an integration account that owns almost all of their records. And that particular user record, that integration user, is in a role hierarchy. That the fact that that sits inside of a role hierarchy means that it's that I'll just read it right here. It's going to take forever to calculate who has visibility to those records. Keep in mind that sharing is all based off of that account sharing table. And so all of those records that are in that particular object have to be read through in order to determine that visibility. And if there's ever anything that changes, the calculation time to calculate that has a significant performance impact. So in a scenario like that, my customer, what I would advise them is to take that integration user outside of, don't assign a role to them. Don't put them in a role hierarchy for that reason, because of the performance and impact that that can have. If that's something that intrigues you and you want to dig a little bit deeper, this designing record access for enterprise scale is something that would be really kind of an interesting article for you to go through. There's a lot of nuances to how you manage your sharing when it comes to larger scale environments that are really good to understand. Yeah, I'll leave that with that, because I think otherwise we probably get a little bit further off topic. But here's some other good resources as well. You have the one that we're just looking at here, but designing records for enterprise scale, and then Architect Core Resources. Architect Core Resources is, if you're not familiar with this particular site, that's nice. It's down for maintenance. I don't think that's the right URL. The Architect site really talks into a lot of details on how you go about designing or building your solutions so that they're well architected, is kind of their new term that they use. So if you do a Google search for Salesforce well architected, that's going to get you into that particular site. And there's tons of really quality information there that for the most part, I think most people don't even think about as they're designing solutions, but it's important from a sales consultant standpoint to have at least some of the basic understanding of overall design. So I'll give you another example. I've had a customer who had, it was a private org, and they had sharing rules. I think it was at the account level, and it was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 plus sharing rules on an account. A lot of those sharing rules said that if Terry owns the record, Meredith gets access. One-to-one type sharing rules. I had to do a bunch of account cleanup information. I forget what the reasoning was. I think we might have actually been moving the org from one org to another, if I remember right, and needed to delete a whole bunch of records. I think it was like in the 250,000 or so records. It was going to take Salesforce, I want to say it was like 36 hours or something like that to delete all of those records. That was an enormous amount of time to delete. I mean, 250,000 records isn't anything small to delete, but it shouldn't take anywhere close to that amount of time. Because we were redoing all of our sharing rules, I started going in and deleting all of those sharing rules out, and I literally could see the performance of the activity of what I was doing start to increase dramatically. So it went from being a day and a half down to like less than 8 hours, I want to say, something like that. So the impact of really poorly designed sharing rules is pretty significant. So when you think about this particular topic of record ownership, it really is kind of important to understand ownership and access, the impact of your decisions or the choices that you advise your customers, because it does have a sizable impact. So if you're looking at your org and you see 100 plus sharing rules, you might want to reconsider that design, see how can we simplify this, make things a little bit better. It's not that it's there's not situations where you have to do that, but you might want to consider how can we simplify things and avoid some of those types of performance problems.
Whenever you did that project, did your client still work in that org, or
Yeah,
curious how you got around that?
We completely redid the sharing model, and most of the time, here's the reality that I run into a lot is that and I can almost tell you probably, I would bet 60+% of the orgs that I go into who don't have really, really solid admins, almost always what they think they are sharing in their visibility roles aren't what they thought that they were. And when you get in and start looking under the hood and you help coach them along in what it should look like, you tend to simplify it quite a bit and you get the results that they're actually looking for. Most of the time, that particular example, the person who they were doing like one-to-one type sharing with already had visibility due to other reasons. And then there was a whole slew of people who had visibility that shouldn't have had visibility because they didn't quite have things set up right. Or they'll go in and I see this frequently too, that admins will go in and say, well, shoot, I'm just going to give them modify all or view all. And they kind of do that as a cop out because they can't figure out the sharing model. And it's like, well, don't do that. Don't do that to yourself. I really, really, really wish Salesforce should get rid of modify all and view all. I hate those permissions. There is some minor use cases where that it is helpful, but in general, it always sends up kind of alarm bells when I see that in an org. So if that's your org, I'm sorry, I'd probably be investigating a little bit deeper to see why do you have that turned on. Things like an integration user would be a good example of why you might have something like that enabled. But for a typical user, probably pretty rare. If you create your row hierarchy correctly, odds are you can eliminate the need for having that view all or modify all. Not always, but frequently. Any questions on any of that piece of it? Is that helpful? Is that maybe some things that you weren't aware of that you can kind of take back and use? All right, everybody's quiet, so I'm assuming that's a good. No questions on that. So the last one that we had is Pearl's presentation, which was on the account hierarchy, describing the impact of account hierarchy on visibility, maintenance, and reporting. And so she did send over her deck, and we're just going to kind of go through this, and hopefully you're able to see that. I'm not going to go into presentation mode with it. So account hierarchy, describe the impact of account hierarchy. So that was her assignment. The account hierarchy gives a global view of a company and its subsidiaries by creating an association between the parent account or using the parent account field. Access to children accounts is not granted through the account hierarchy. Okay, that's the key. That's a key piece right there to understand. When we talk about security and record visibility, just because I can see the parent record, it does not mean that I get to see the child, the subsidiary records related to that account. It's all based off of that ownership stuff that we talked about, not the hierarchy. That makes sense? Okay. That looks like that must be the same slide. All right, filtering reports by teams. If an organization's role hierarchy uses roles to represent teams. There are a number of report filters that can be used to display data for specific teams. So your role hierarchy link returns the records that the user in the role can see based off of the sharing model. Okay, so I think what she's saying there is that the records you see on your report are based off of what you have visibility to. The owner role filter returns the records owned by the user in that role, uses the role name to display on the report value from the role. The My Team filter, I think that probably was intended to be bold. The My Team filter returns records owned by users viewing the reports, dashboards, running user, or users in the roles below them. Not sure if I am agreeing with that. The My Team, show My Team's filter returns records owned by the user viewing the report or dashboard, running user, and users in the role. That's it. Yeah, that would be true. Yeah, that makes sense. We're talking record visibility here, not the. Initially, I was thinking that was the filter that you could use to see yours and your team's records. And I guess it's really the same thing, I guess, when I think about it. So yeah, that makes sense. Any questions on any of those? The account contact relationship, use the related list on accounts and contact objects to display related objects. Yeah, the one thing that I would just remember, because it's an easy gotcha, is it's super, super easy to think that contacts are in a master detail relationship with accounts. They are not. If you go behind the scenes and using the API or using something like Data Loader, you can actually load contacts with no account ID. It's the UI on the Salesforce side that's enforcing it. So the data model, it is technically not a master detail. I don't know 100% sure why it's not. I've not dug into the reasoning behind that. But it isn't. And sometimes that can be a little bit on the frustrating side for why that's not master detail. But keep that in mind, because a lot of people get hung up over that because they think every time I create an account in Salesforce, it makes me add them to every time I create a contact, it makes me add it to an account. So it must be a master detail. And it's just keep in mind, again, that it is not.
So then to go back to what you said earlier about sharing, if your accounts are public and your contacts are private, and you did not own the contact, you could still see the account, but you might not be able to see the related contacts unless you're an owner.
Yeah, only the ones that have been granted visibility to you. Yeah.
Okay.
You will see the account. Does that make sense?
It does. And then I was thinking back to the other slide about my teams. If you're the manager and you have your team of people below you in the hierarchy and you say, show me my team's opportunities, is it just going to be the people that roll up to you in the hierarchy? Or will it be the people, opportunities that roll up to you in the hierarchy plus yours? I'm trying to remember.
I think, isn't there a distinction between the two? I think that if it's my team, it's just those underneath you. But I was thinking that there was also the ability to include yourself in that too. And I don't do a lot of reports. People don't like to pay me to write reports at my rate. So
Yeah.
most of the time they write their own, or they have
I've
somebody else
been
do
away
it.
from it for a while too. So I feel like that's
I know. So if you guys
question.
write reports, can you clarify that? If any of you, because I honestly I get into reports almost never on the Salesforce side. About the only time I get a phone call is if they get stuck on something they don't know how to do, like joined reports or formulas, that sort of thing is when I get pulled in. So I am not probably the right person to answer that one.
I'll play around with it and report.
Yeah, I'd be kind of curious there too. It seems to me like it's only your subordinates that show up, at least initially. But I thought that there was also a way to include yourself in it, but I could be wrong.
I'm running one right now. I'll let you know.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly.
Awesome. Let's see. Where did we leave? Contact role. Contact role defines the part that a contact plays within a specific opportunity. Okay. So yeah, this contact roles, this would be your opportunity contact roles. A contact can be given different roles for different opportunities, contracts, or cases. Now, what's not stated here is that you can control whether or not that access is read or write as well. And then you've got partner roles. Now, this is interesting because a lot of us don't probably work with partners in our orgs. So this would be somebody coming in where you've got Experience Cloud in the mix and they're assigned to a partner Experience Cloud license. I forget exactly what those words are or what they call that license, but that would give them access to opportunity data. And so a partner role defines the part that the partner plays on the account or opportunity. The partner account can be given different roles and for different opportunities. Very true. And Kelly, you got an answer. It does not include me, as well as those. Oh, it does. It does include me and those underneath me. Okay. All right. Was there a way to exclude me from it that you saw? At least easily?
I mean, you could do, so I did activities report and I could assign does not equal to Kelly and just get that for me. Yeah.
True. That's true. Okay. So it does include me and my team. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Thank you.
Thanks.
When a partner account is added to a partner related list on an opportunity, the partner related list on the related account is automatically updated. And that makes sense too, for the obvious reason. If you can see the opportunity, you should be able to see the account. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Okay. Dashboard considerations. I'll be honest, I wasn't totally sure I understood what where she was going with this particular one, but guidance for building your dashboards, purpose, who the audience is, the frequency of use, the data volume, the time frame, and then your component selection. So I think what she's trying to say here is just some best practices when it comes to designing your dashboards. Making sure that the reason for the dashboard is consistent. So you don't have, if your dashboard is intended for customer service or the help desk environment, you don't go and throw a sales component or opportunity graph on that particular dashboard. It just doesn't belong there. Who is your audience and making sure that it's really designed for that group. The rest of it, I think, is kind of self-explanatory, how frequently they want to use it, the amount of data that it's got to pull, and the timeframes there. So, and then component selection is just making sure you're using the right type of chart. To me, one of the most unutilized options in your chart is just the simple number. I think people forget about that one a lot of times. And to me, that's one of the, I love going in and just seeing, here's the number. This is where we are right now. And it's this, there's no graph, nothing fancy there. It's just you go and you see that count, and it's so simple to read and understand what's going on sometimes. And often people like the fancy chart or the thermometer, the speed gauge, whatever it is. And the number just is it's hard to beat when it comes to readability and ease. So component selection, there's a good one. Any questions? I think we managed to cover this topic pretty darn well. Any